Hello, everybody. My name is Margot.
And I'm Kimberly.
And today we are here to talk to you about
Adventure books.
Adventure books. I was just going to say books, and I'm like, wait, that's just...
No, our theme this time is
adventure. So there's nothing better than a quest or just an adventure, especially over the summer. I grew up reading books by the pool because I didn't want to go into the pool because it had bugs in it. And yet I was like, I am clearly a mighty warrior.
Yeah,
I'm going to slay the dragon.
Obviously.
But also if a bug touches me, I will die. Mm-hmm. So these are the books that kept me entertained over the summer when I was being a dweeb.
Afraid of bugs.
But
not dragons.
Not dragons. I'm no longer afraid of bugs.
Good for you.
Yes.
Grown up.
So my first book recommendation is Martin the Warrior by Brian Jakes. It is a novel from the Redwall series. It's a prequel. So the premise of the Redwall series, it's all about different woodland creatures who have swords and fight. But there's an abbey called Redwall where all these creatures live together in harmony, and it was founded by this sort of mythical character named Martin the Warrior. And throughout the series, you just hear about him and how he's this big mythic figure. Yep. But then you read the book that introduces him, and it is all about his life and all about how he sort of came to be the character he was and how he came to found the abbey. I just think it is a fantastic, fun adventure novel full of mice and weasels.
There's an otter in one.
And yes, there are otters and badgers.
All kinds of animals.
And it's just, and squirrels, so many squirrels. Mm-hmm. Love squirrels.
I loved those books when I was a kid. They're my favorite.
But this one, I love the entire series. I have never met a Redwall book I didn't love, but this is my absolute favorite. I think Martin the Warrior is probably still just one of my favorite characters, but that's because I have a type. And he is just I'm the good boy.
He's the goodest boy.
He's the goodest boy. So yes, if you want to read about the goodest boy being a good stabbing mouse who stabs, I would recommend this one.
They're very good. The first one I have to talk about is called Prudence. It is by Gail Carriger. This one is a companion series to the Parasol Protectorate, the first book being Soulless. This one follows a character who's introduced in the original series, but it's all a steampunk fantasy adventure. Prudence is a young adult. I think she's in her early 20s or something like that. And for her birthday, she's gifted a dirigible. And so she decides to take her best friends and go on an adventure. And this entire series, there are 4 of them now. The last one's coming out sometime this year. It's so full of adventure. It's so cute. It's all set in the Victorian era. So there's a lot of descriptions of pretty clothes and drinking tea and just generally being British and wonderful. It's one of my favorite. She's just one of my favorite authors in general, just because she can really build a world that is absolutely fascinating. And it's an alt history steampunk kind of an adventure. And Prudence, I think, is one of my all-time favorite characters that she's actually written, because she's so spunky and she has these magical abilities that are really interesting that I haven't quite seen in any other book. But this one is one of those, if you just want to go on a sailing, floating adventure through the skies.
I have a book that leads really well into mine. So this isn't the best representation of it. This is the audiobook version of Leviathan by Scott Westerfeld. It is a 3-book series. It's an alternate history World War I series about if we were the world was in the First World War, but instead of having the weapons that they did have, they're divided sort of between the Darwinists, who are the British and French and that side, and they have their technology is based on genetic engineering. So their blimp would not be just a big dirigible, it's a giant floating whale that they have bred to do that. And they have all these different kinds. Yeah, they have all these different kinds of crazy biological based creatures that they use to get around. And it just seems super normal for them. And on the other side, the like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they all have machines. So they're like the Darwinists and the clankers. And it's about a girl who dresses up as a boy so she can join and fly, so she can join the military and fly. And then she befriends and meets the fictional, but the son of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and they become friends.
That's cool.
But it's really cool. There's a bunch of books and by a bunch I mean 2 others aside from this one that are Goliath or Behemoth and I think Goliath, something like that. But yes, sorry, I'm taking way too long. I just really love this book. I love the series. I would recommend the audiobook is great. It's done by Alan Cumming.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he does a great job. But the physical book has illustrations that are just some of the best illustrations I've seen in books. And it's very good for YA and up.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
20 years.
The next one I have is also set in Victorian London because I too have a thing, and that is books set in Victorian London. This one follows a young girl named Mary, and she is set to be hanged when she's only 12 years old, because remember, it's Victorian London, for stealing. And so she is saved by this woman who decides to take her to a school where she essentially learns how to be a lady spy. You would love this book. It is so good. It's full of all kinds of like femme power, and it's just Mary being Mary and getting a certain kind of freedom that wouldn't necessarily be realistic or true for women of the day, but is a little bit just kind of fudges history a tiny bit for the purpose of a book. But she is so cool. She's so witty. She's so spunky. She just solves all these mysteries. This is the first in another series, so I think there's like maybe 4 or 5 books. And it's just her being a lady spy in Victorian London. It's very good. Highly recommend. They're so fun. So it's like not adventures in that she's like floating around or going around doing things, but like her exploring the city and like getting to explore different identities because she is spying is its own kind of adventure, and just having the kind of power and the kind of independence for a young woman in this time period is also pretty adventurous.
That is so very my jam.
It's very your jam.
Steal it
You
from
would
you
love it.
because yes. Okay, so my next one is it skews a lot younger, and it's very much more the traditional like fantasy adventure story kind of. It's very cute. It is a picture book called Nobody Likes a Goblin.
So good.
I always say like this book is my favorite, but I say that about every book, but this is genuinely one of my favorite picture books. It is about a goblin who lives in a cave, and he loves to hang out with rats, and his best friend is a skeleton. And he just sits on his hoard of gold with his skeleton buddy. But then one day, a bunch of very mean, nasty adventurers come to the goblin's cave, and they steal all his stuff, and they take his best friend, the skeleton. So it's up to Goblin to go and get Skeleton back. And along the way, they make all sorts of friends. It's by Ben Hatke. Sorry, Ben, wherever you are and whatever you were doing. But it's just a fun fantasy romp that anybody could enjoy.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have a small human.
Even if you're an adult like me, because Margot told me about this book and I read it, and it's precious. And what's interesting about this one is all of the good guys, so like the adventures that you would see in like other fantasy novels or video games, like the adventurers who come in and take all the treasure and like are the heroes of the story, are actually the villains. Mm-hmm. And so all these bad guys, so like goblins, skeletons, and other spooky creatures are the ones who go on this massive adventure. So it just flips that whole narrative on its script in a very cute, adorable way.
I just have to show you here's Skeleton.
He's so good.
He's a very good boy.
He's a very good boy.
So yes, that is that one.
So I have another book set in Victorian England. I just realized I have a thing. It's also an alt Victorian England. This one is a romance novel, so it's for the adult crowd. This one is really interesting because it follows two characters that are in a different series of KJ Charles, who's one of my all-time favorite authors, romance or otherwise. But this one is, they have a past together and they're kind of thrown into a situation where they're running from people and they go on basically an adventure through the countryside of England until they finally end up in this small town where they just kind of have to get reacquainted with one another. It's beautiful. There's actually magic in this one. So if you're a little bit shy in regards to like trying out like a technical romance novel in the genre, this is a really good start. Just because there is a fantasy element to it. So it can kind of like, if you like fantasy, then this can kind of get you involved in a more romance themed story. But this one features two of my all-time favorite characters ever written, ever. It's lovely. It's a little bit heartbreaking in some parts, but it's also extremely hopeful and beautifully written. The way that the author just uses words to describe like environments or like magical things happening is just some of the best writing I've ever read. But this is my last Victorian. Yes, my last Victorian book, I promise. But I also recommend this one, Jackdaw. I don't think I said the title, but Jackdaw by KJ Charles, one of my favorites.
Question: do you have to have read other books in the series, or is that a good? Okay, good to know.
There are characters in the Charm of Magpie series featured in this one, and technically Jonah is in the Charm of Magpie series, but this is like his own book.
Oh,
so you can read it independently, or you can also read the other series, which I also recommend, which is very, 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 very good.
Nifty.
Deals with magic.
Okay, magic. On an entirely different note, I'm going to jump genres. And so this is not a Dungeons and Dragons style adventure or anything like that, or a fun Victorian romp. This is Marvel's Champions. So I've had a lot of younger sort of teens especially ask me, if I want to get into comics, I like superhero movies, but if I want to get into comics, where do I start? That's the big problem, is like getting into reading comics themselves can be really intimidating. There's a lot out there. A lot. I've been reading comics since I was like 10.
Baby nerd.
Since I was baby nerd. And so it took me forever to get to where I'm like, okay, I think I know what's going on. But if somebody just wants to dip a toe in it, it can get kind of hard. You're like,
it's really overwhelming.
What is that? So Champions is sort of a reimagining of a lot of Marvel characters for a younger audience. So we have characters in the Champions like Miles Morales as Spider-Man, who you may have seen in Into the Spider-Verse. There's a younger version of Cyclops from the X-Men. You have Miss Marvel. There's Vision, who is the daughter of the Vision, and all sorts of awesome, fun, amazing new characters. And so it has ties to like other Marvel stories. It takes place in the same Marvel comic book universe, but it's a way to start fresh with a new team and move forward. This is technically the second volume because the first volume was checked out. But yeah, if you are somebody who wants to try to get into comics, I think this would be a fun jumping off point.
My next book is The Book of Dust, or La Belle Sauvage, by Philip Pullman. You probably know him from his Dark Materials, the first book being The Golden Compass. This is his companion series that takes place, the first book takes place 20-ish years, I think. Wait, no, not 20-ish years. It takes place X amount of years before The Golden Compass. If you've read The Golden Compass and you're aware of the series, this book features a teeny tiny baby Lyra and a teeny tiny baby Pan, which is wonderful. But this universe is a little complicated and complex, so I don't think I can describe it very well, but it's a magical realm that is kind of like ours, but it's developed differently in that people have what is called like demons, which are basically these little companions that are essentially a manifestation of your soul. And that seems kind of intense, but it's really beautiful and lovely, and they're in the form of little animals. And so everyone in this book, they have their own little animal companions, basically, that follow them around everywhere. And this book follows a little boy named Malcolm, who is the goodest boy. You would love it. And so it takes place, like I said, prior to the events in the Golden Compass. So a lot of it is kind of setting up the events of the other series, but you can read this one independently of his Dark Materials. But I always recommend this one because it's just amazing. And it's also one of the best adventure stories I think I've ever read. The first part, maybe like not half, but first third, is kind of like a spy thriller novel, which is really interesting. I wasn't expecting that. And then something happens. There's this great big flood. And so Malcolm and Tiny Baby Ira and Tiny Baby Pan and another friend of his go on this epic adventure where everything is magical and weird and kind of twisted. And they live in a version of Oxford, but when the flood comes, it becomes like this weird magical realm where they're in this boat and they're just going through this world, and these things are happening that don't quite seem attached to reality. So the entire thing feels almost like this really vivid dream or like a Greek adventure. So like this one actually, like I always say, the first part is like a spy, like a spy novel, and then the rest of it is basically the Odyssey. It's really, really cool. They encounter like these giant, great big monsters or like creepy witches on this like little island. And there's so many strange things happening, but it's so adventurous. It's so interesting. Philip Pullman is an absolutely phenomenal writer. And then the audiobook for this one is also really, really, really good. I know some people, because it's a really big book, and because the first part kind of starts out as a spy thriller, most people picking up a fantasy aren't quite expecting that, so they struggle to get into it. If you're struggling with this one, read the audiobook. It's so good. It's narrated by Michael Sheen. Ooh. So it's so amazing. It's one of the best audiobooks, like top 5 audiobooks I've ever listened to. He does such a good job with his performance, and he really just brings to life all of these characters. But yeah, this is a good one if you want any amount of adventure and any amount of just wild happenings. And the cover is also very, very pretty. But yeah, I recommend that one.
I also, the whole time, I had to like rein in my dad joke because I was like, hey, Kim, does it contain dust? Is there dust in there? Is the book dusty? And I was like, I can't. They're doing their thing. You gotta... Sorry, getting off track. I know it is not funny. I genuinely understand this, but also my lizard brain.
Your lizard dad brain.
My lizard dad brain was like, you gotta say it. So this is a really good chapter book for kiddos who are just starting to read chapter books. It's called My Father's Dragon. It's about a little boy named Elmer Elevator. And he is the narrator's father. So the narrator is telling stories about when his father, Elmer Elevator, was a little boy and how his father meets this dragon and they go to a magical island and they have these kind of amazing sort of episodic adventures where he meets a lion and then he meets all these other fantastical creatures. And I got into this one as a kid because my brother and I would read these together. Mm-hmm. And so I always like, these books remind me of him. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he remembers that at all, but it's a good, if your kid is too young to read The Hobbit, but you want them to eventually like The Hobbit, this is exactly the book you want. And there are a couple of them in the series. There's The Dragons of Blue Land, and then I believe there's one more, but yes. My Father's Dragon by Ruth Stiles Gannett is excellent. Also, I don't know if showing you will help, but it has really, really cute illustrations too. If your kiddo has a shorter attention span and you need them to keep engaged, there's pictures. The chapters are pretty well like their own little story. So you don't have to read the whole thing in one sitting. But yeah, I ramble.
Okay, my last book is one of my all-time favorites. It is The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. What you cannot see is Vanessa's behind the computer also going, because it's such a good book. It's such a good book. The main character is Henry Montague, but he goes by Monty. It's set in the 1700s. It's not an alternate retelling. There's some elements of sort of magic. It's like there's a lot of like alchemy and things like that. So it's really interesting. It's kind of got like a little bit of a magic-y, not quite element to it. But Henry is about to go on his world tour. and of the continent, I guess. And he is going with his best friend, who is absolutely madly in love with. And so he and his little sister and his best friend Percy are all going on a tour, and then crazy things start to happen. And so events in the story happen, and his tour doesn't exactly go to plan. But this one has all kinds of adventure. It's all over like Europe. I think at some point they're in Spain, they go to France, they go to Italy, there's some parts in England. It's just all over. They're on boats, they're like covered in dirt walking through the wilderness, they're in like carriages. There's just it's like Mackenzie Lee crawled into my brain and was like, hey Kimberly, I'm going to write you a perfect novel, and then this is the result. It's just one of my all-time favorites. It's like top 5 favorite books of all time, if not possibly like top 3 favorite books. It is so magical in a sense that it just makes you feel so good reading. Monty is definitely a bit of an anti-hero at some points because he has some learning to do and some growing, which happens throughout the book, which is really cool. And then this book is technically a young adult novel, but it is good for pretty much anyone of all ages once you're about a teenager and up. So adults will absolutely love this. Any adult I've recommended this to has absolutely loved it. But it's also a really good book for teens because the entire theme, or I guess adults as well, because the entire theme of the book is just be kind, either to yourself or others. It's just the theme is be kind, be a good person, try your best. And it's something that Monty learns throughout the book. But it's so cool. There are pirates in it. His sister, he absolutely hates because they have a sibling rivalry thing going on, but she is wonderful. She is so cool. She just like loves science and medicine and just like gets stuff done. It's just, it's so good. It's so good. It's one of my absolute favorites. It's so lovely and romantic and adventurous and just sweet and at times heartbreaking, but it's so good. So good.
Also, the audiobook is great.
Yeah, the audiobook is really good. It's
Audiobook
narrated.
is so good.
I can't remember his name, but it's the actor who played he played Tom Riddle in the Harry Potter movies.
Oh.
Yeah.
That. Oh.
But it's really good.
It's so good.
It's so good. Anyone I talk to about it is just like, it's my favorite. I'm like, yes, I know.
So I keep picking books that would be better in print form if they are not available in print form. It is The Inquisitor's Tale by Adam Gidwitz. I'm so bad at pronouncing last names. And it's the tagline, I guess, is "Or the 3 magical children and their holy dog." And this takes place in France in the 1200s, and there's witches and crazy things, and it's very much like Canterbury Tales, where it's everyone sitting down and listening to a story. So there's the Inquisitor who is trying to find out where these 3 children and their magical dog have gone. And he goes around and everyone's like, oh, I saw them. This is what happened. But it's about a little girl who has some sort of supernatural power and her dog who saved her as a kid. And so they're wanted by the crown for being magical, and a bunch of other children, like one has ridiculous strength. It's illustrated like an illuminated manuscript. Ooh. There's a bunch of marginalia. Like illustrations are just super, super beautiful. I think it would be a good read-alike if anybody's read Crispin by Avi. It's like kind of a more magical version of that. It's a little bit like alternate history, a little bit adventure, a little bit Canterbury Tales, but for kids, which is a weird, but no, I love this one. It is super fun. While the audiobook is great, and I do love it and I've listened to it, I would check out the print version just so you can see the illustrations. Is that?
Yeah, I'm done.
So I believe that is it for today. Oh yes, feel free to just hit that little subscribe button wherever he lives. Like I think down this away.
Somewhere.
Click it. Be sure to like us on Facebook at Lawrence Public Library, or visit our website, which is
lplkansas.org.
Yes, lplks.org.
Sorry.
And if you want recommendations, let us know and
Yep.
we can do that.
I am in the reader services department, so I mostly deal with adult books. If you walk into the library and you just keep going straight, that's where I live. And then
I work with the small goblins, and by that I mean children. Yeah, little ones. I shouldn't call them small goblins. It's goblins are good and cute.
as we learned today,
wholesome.
goblins are great.
But I work with the smaller ones, but I also read a fair amount of YA and I read a lot of comics. So if you ever want to talk comics,
Yeah.
then let
So
me know.
find us on the floor. We practically live here.
It is true.
So yeah, if you need any recommendations, you just let us know, either online or in person.
Oh wow, we ran long. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
No.